No one cares about AI if the Wi-Fi doesn't work. And we work in countries where the local government will turn off the internet. We'll say, you know what, we're unplugging the internet for the country right now. And so, something we've been doing to sort of make us more robust and just silent running every day, everything works, is we've been deploying Leo Satcom. I can talk about this forever. I think it is changing the world. I think it is totally magical. Like, it is such an amazing capability that today you can give someone something the size of a dinner plate. They can plug it into a Ford cigarette lighter, and then hundreds of people can watch YouTube videos. Like, what?
Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. My guest today is Dr. Kelly Fletcher. Kelly serves as the Chief Information Officer of the U.S. Department of State and the Assistant Secretary level head of the Bureau of Diplomatic Technology. She oversees and guides the delivery of simple, modern, and secure technology to support global diplomacy for 100,000 users in 190 countries. She's improved the cybersecurity posture of the State Department and led the successful identification, response, and recovery of the Chinese hack of Microsoft as well. She's also improved user experience through operational excellence, enhanced global connectivity, and delivery of new capabilities at all classification levels. Prior to her current role, Kelly served as the Principal Deputy Chief Information Officer at the Department of Defense and as the Department of the Navy Deputy CIO. Kelly, welcome to Technovation. It's great to speak with you today.
Thanks so much for having me. Thanks for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure, certainly. Well, let's begin, Kelly. Most people would be familiar with the State Department, certainly, and yet I imagine most people also have kind of a shallow understanding as to the work that the department does. Can you take a moment and provide a bit of more of an overview of the work of the State Department?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, like, as an American citizen, I associate the State Department with passports, and we issue like over 20 million passports every year. We also issue visas. So if you're not an American, you want to come to America, you may need a visa. We issue those visas. The other thing is, if you're overseas and you're in trouble, you got some kind of problem, we have embassies, we have consulates. But a big part of what we do is also diplomacy, right? We are in these countries not just to help American citizens, not just to issue visas, but also to engage with the local people, to understand what's going on there, to build a relationship, to promote American businesses, right? To really serve as like a, you know, literally the ambassador, you know what I mean? And the other thing I would say about state from a technology perspective that has been a big learning moment for me is we are accepting risk from a cyber perspective in a way that I just never could have imagined. And that's because of our mission. So when I came from DoD, I was describing how tough cybersecurity was to get right at state to my friends back at DoD. And they said, well, would it help if not everyone knew that you were like American government representatives? And that thought had occurred to me too. And I said, well, here's the problem. We're in the building, just right next to the giant American flag. Like, we are there to engage with local people. We are there as American government representatives. And we live in these places, right? Like, we live there for 1 to 4 years, but we are buying bread from the baker. We are, engaging with the local people, both in our daily life and as part of our job. It is our job to open emails from foreign nationals. That is our job. And then they may provide us an attachment, and it's our job to open that too. So it's just, we are truly embedded in local communities.
Very interesting. And I want to get more into the nuances of that as you've explained to me in the past, which is really interesting. Before we do, though, just from a context setting perspective, I'd love to understand a little bit more about the nuances of the role of CIO at the State Department. Talk a bit about your purview, if you would.
This is a great question. So we actually just underwent a really big change. Historically, the CIO has had policy oversight governance responsibilities across the entire department's IT and cybersecurity. And in that role, I was draconian about cybersecurity. You can imagine why. Um, but I was a little bit more relaxed, letting a thousand flowers bloom on, where are you building, or, how are you solving certain technical problems, but draconian about cybersecurity. And in this time when we had this federated model, um, diplomatic technology ran about half of the IT and cybersecurity. So, big enterprise platforms. We're running email for the department. We're running the network. We're providing enterprise services. So identity, we're providing that for everyone. But we weren't running, for example, the HR applications. This last month, we had a big reorganization, and over 90% of the department's technologists and technology are now under diplomatic technology officially. So the bureau I run. And so that means these new functional domains, so HR IT and some of our logistics IT, and also the IT that supports passports and visas, that is now under diplomatic technology. And this is good. You know, it aligns us more with the private sector. I think putting all the technologists together is there's a lot of efficiency and value from that. But the one area where I'm really focused now is, med is a great example. Medical, our doctors who serve overseas and they're the doctors for the State Department. They had technologists, and those technologists were building a med app. They were building an electronic health record, which is great. We're rolling out the patient portal any minute. Like it's really great work. And these technologists were embedded in the Med Bureau. So they were hearing very, very loudly and very, very consistently the demand from the doctors as a customer base and the functional owner of what was needed from a technology perspective. And they were hearing loud and clear from me and the CISO of the department what was needed from a cybersecurity perspective. But they weren't embedded with the rest of the technologists in the department. And now they are. So now they are embedded with diplomatic technology. And the head of the Met Bureau came to me and said, we had such a great relationship with them. They made something magical happen. How do we sustain this? You know what I mean? How are we very intentional so that I, the functional owner, still am able to have my requirements be at the top of the list? So throughout all of the functional owners, we're working on the best model for that, right? Like how much engagement, when is it? Is it, quarterly governance meeting? How do we do that? But we're being very intentional because I think, before the pendulum was too far over here where they weren't embedded with other technologists, what we don't want to do is have functional owners not feel like they can shape the requirements that technologists have.
Very interesting, and especially in light of how complex and distributed the State Department is. And I'd love to have you speak a little bit more, if you don't mind, as to how your organization is distributed to reflect that. I mentioned in the intro, 190 countries in which the State Department operates. Talk a little bit about how IT reflects that. Surely you're not in every last one of those, though I'm sure you've got access points across everyone and probably major hubs across the world as well. Talk a bit about how IT gains its leverage across such a distributed system.
I think this is such an interesting question. So we actually do have a person in almost every country who is the technologist, right? And they're not just running technology, they also run the mailroom in many cases. We call them diplomatic technology chiefs. That is the person who runs technology for that embassy or consulate. I will tell you that as technology has changed, their roles have changed. So it used to be that they had their own Active Directory structure for their embassy. You know what I mean? Someone came from Washington, brought nothing with them, showed up, and they were handed a computer. They were put in as, now Kelly Fletcher, instead of being domestic, it's Kelly Fletcher who works in Bujumbura. We would futz with the Active Directory. There was a lot of hands-on administration. And that's frankly how it had to be, right? When you were kind of an island, you weren't regularly connected, when what we could do from DC was more limited. And what we've stood up recently is we've made two big changes. One is we give people computers that they can take with them and phones. This is, it shouldn't be mind-blowing, but it has made a huge difference. That some folks say, oh, I don't want to carry a computer with me as I move across the world. Okay, maybe they want a phone. But what we have to do is equip foreign service professionals with ways to stay connected, right? So while you're in transit from your home in DC, maybe to Niger, I want you to be able to check your email, check in with your posts. You run into trouble, be able to call someone. We've also changed our Active Directory structure, which sounds very, very nerdy. It sounds very boring, but it has made a big impact on people where they never lose connectivity, right? They have the same email. They also have the same telephone number, which they have a 202. That's a domestic DC number, and that is a Teams number. And if I go to Niger and I'm living in Niger, I still have that 202 number. And I will have that number for my entire length of service at the State Department. No matter where I am in the world, I can be reached at that number. some people say it's maybe not a pro, but I think for connectivity, it's a huge pro. And then the folks who are overseas, what is really interesting to me is these DT chiefs, some of them are there to help folks build new dashboards. They're like really driving to help folks adopt our generative AI tools. They're in places that have robust local infrastructure, robust embassy infrastructure. Maybe they're in a new embassy. They're helping, they're like a consultant in helping people solve their problems with technology. And we have other places where I call them telephone refrigerators. We're phasing them out, but just very, very dated infrastructure. And so they are crawling into the walls trying to figure out what happened. When the telephone lines go down outside, so there's a storm, we lose telephone lines. They're trying to figure out, like, what do we do here? And the cool thing about these foreign service IT professionals is we have people, I had a guy say to me, I want to wear cargo pants and I want to run fiber. And I said, that's awesome. You know what I mean? Like, we have work for you. And I have people who say, no, I want to talk to the ambassador about what is Huawei and why shouldn't we use it? And, what is 5G and how does generative AI work? And I said, okay, we have work for you. So it's a little bit of choose your own adventure based on where you are, which is really, I think, cool.
That's very interesting. Yeah, rare that an organization could be so diverse as to provide opportunities as diverse as the ones you've described, and no doubt many that you've not. I wanted you've begun to introduce a topic I wanted to explore a little bit more deeply with you, and that is the topic of modernization. When you joined 2.5 years ago, you identified opportunities to modernize the technology landscape, and you're alluding to some of the opportunities identified. I wonder if you can provide a little bit more anecdotes as to where you saw some of the biggest opportunities to do so.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I guess I would say I showed up and I am so blessed that I inherited just the best team. The people who are patient, people who taught me what I need to know, and people who were already like well on the path. You know what I mean? They needed someone to sort of bulldoze problems. And so the first two things that we care about at the State Department are operational excellence and cybersecurity. And what I always say is no one cares about AI if the Wi-Fi doesn't work, which is true and frustrating. But operational excellence at state is actually pretty challenging. Just, silent running, everything working for everyone all the time. And a big part of the reason for that is because we're operating in 190 countries, wildly diverse environments as far as like, what is the quality of their internet service, having nothing to do with us or our building or our land. You know what I mean? Like, just what are we pulling in from the ISP? And we work in countries where the local government will turn off the internet. We'll say, you know what, we're unplugging the internet for the country right now. That is like a safety of life issue. Absolutely. And that is it's today you can't do your job, right, without connectivity. And so something we've been doing to sort of make us more robust and just silent running every day, everything works, is we've been deploying LEO SATCOM, low Earth orbit satellite communications capabilities. And I can talk about this forever. I think it is changing the world. I think it's totally magical. Like, forget, it makes my job a lot easier. I love that. But like, it is such an amazing capability that today you can give someone something the size of a dinner plate. They can plug it into a Ford cigarette lighter, and then hundreds of people can watch YouTube videos. Like, what? But that is sort of a sidebar. But for our work, we're deploying these terminals. First, we started by doing it in a very ad hoc way. Are you having a problem? Okay, we'll get you a terminal. And then we were using it as our secondary. So we had a primary ISP, and then we'd fail over to the secondary as needed. We were using it sometimes as emergency comms. We previously had satellite comms through like MEO SATCOM, and they were suitcases, and you needed an IT professional, and they worked, but it involved a little bit of prayer and like a little bit of, just right jiggling. They weren't easy and obvious in the way that today's LEO SATCOM capability is. So we've moved from this sort of ad hoc approach, we see something bad happening, we're worried about connectivity, to very intentional. So we've hit all the places that we were worried about, it was a tough moment. And now we're going to places where we're paying a lot for sort of bad ISP service, for whatever reason. And we're saying, we can actually save money by deploying LEO SATCOM in these places. We've deployed 350 terminals. So many places have more than one. But but we're at 350 today, and I think that number is just going to keep growing. And what that does is it just keeps people connected, which is really, really important. So that's like one thing. In operational excellence, Leo Satcom, technology has changed. It makes us look like magicians. We'll take it, but it's a huge saver for us. The second thing is cybersecurity. So when China is reading your email, you also can't talk about generative AI. You're also stuck just talking about cybersecurity. So that's our second, operational excellence and cybersecurity. Those go together. And within cybersecurity, I will say, when I learned more about the posture of the State Department from a risk perspective, we have local nationals in most of our embassies. They're on the network every day. It became clear to me that making the commitment that we would never have a cyber event was not a rational commitment to make. So the commitment I made to my leadership is that we are going to aim to identify that something has gone wrong. We're going to respond and we're going to recover. And we're going to do that really fast. And we're going to do that in coordination with our industry partners. We're going to do it in coordination with the broader government in general to get some help. But we're going to have events. And so we had an event in May of 2023, which you mentioned. And the reason I mentioned that is that it's all in the public domain, which makes it really magical. I can assure you I have a lot of practice on this. But in that event, there was a broad sort of global hack of more than 20 organizations of Microsoft by China. And the State Department was part of that. And no one saw anything. No one saw anything weird until we got hacked. And the first thing we saw was I got a note saying, like, we're seeing this weird thing. This alert is fired, and it has fired sometimes, and it was nothing. But this time it might not be nothing. So I actually went back and read these emails. I sent an email to like God and country, to like the vendor. I sent an email to, all the people in the US government who would have to care. And I said, basically, this may be nothing, but it looks real weird. Send help. We'd like your help. And it was something, right? It was actually like a very big hack of Microsoft. So that was an example where you don't want to be hacked. That's not ideal. But we did exactly what I hope that we can do. And in this case in particular, there was nothing we could have done to prevent it. China hacked Microsoft. But we knew it was happening because we have exquisite like logging and alerting. And not only do we have good alerting and that we have many robust alerts for different scenarios, but we knew that this one was bad. You know what I mean? Which is the whole trick with alerting. And then we responded, right? We got a bunch of help, we called people, and we recovered from the event. So I think that was like an example of exactly what I hope that we will do. So those are two things that I would say are just like everyday table stakes, operational excellence, cybersecurity. But when we look at like the transformation we're trying to drive, that's where I'm like, sort of my heart sinks. And we get into like generative AI and we get into how are we using data. And in that world, I think that we're making really cool and important strides. And I would say two domains. One is a reduction of toil. Like, I love this. I stole this from someone, I don't know who, but it's brilliant. The word toil. I just want to reduce toil. And then I also want to actually like drive diplomacy. You know what I mean? Equip diplomats with more data or a different perspective and enable them to be even more effective at their job.
Really interesting. I want to just return before we get off of cybersecurity. You mentioned something earlier that you also mentioned to me previously, and that is the notion that at the State Department, very different from the Department of Defense, for example, you have to open every attachment. That was a remarkable revelation to me when you first mentioned it to me. And can you talk a little bit about that orientation, the why, of course, but also then what you do on the back end of it, because of course not all attachments are good attachments.
So this is a really good point, and I've actually stolen this phrase of it is our job to open emails from foreign nationals and then to open the attachment they provide. I stole that from someone in diplomatic security. Thank you to him. Because at DoD, the posture was we accepted less risk. So if you opened an email from a foreign national who did not know, and it ended up being malware, it ended up being phishing, you would get trained. They would come and find you and say, listen, you did this and you shouldn't have done it. And there was a lot of responsibility on the user to reduce risk. And at State, honestly, that is understood as part of our job, which is to engage with local nationals. So, and also local nationals staff our embassies. Like every embassy almost has wonderful local people and they're on the network. So, from that perspective, we're doing a lot of work with identity and credentials and access management, right? Who has to have access to what? So, when we look at cables, this is how we communicate. We send these narrative sort of reports. It's reporting, but we send millions and millions of them. And they're like our core information of who's doing what, what's happening in a country. And these cables, we used to do it, we used to tag and caption them. So it was actually like manual data tagging to say the only people who can see this cable are US citizens who have a need to know about farming. You know what I mean? Or it would say this, in a rare case, this cable anyone can read. Like this is for anyone who works at the State Department. Other cables would be obviously classified, but even among unclassified cables, there are like thousands of permutations of who's allowed to read it based on both content and sort of your status. Like, what is your clearance level? Are you local staff or are you an employed family member? This is another category of employment. Are you a civil service employee? Are you a foreign service employee? So we've spent a lot of time really getting identity right. And then I will say, as a plug for what we're doing with transformation, you know, this data tagging, this manual tagging. So if I wrote a cable and it was about soybean farming, I would tag it hashtag soybeans, hashtag farming. And then I would decide, can only local people read it? Or, you know, maybe it's limited to just the embassy I'm in. Who knows? And so I add all these tags manually, which is work. And you can imagine, like, we don't need to do that anymore, right? Generative AI can tell us if we should hashtag soybean this. And it won't be perfect and we'll probably have to review it. But right now, the policy that we've had for decades is you will write the cable and then you will manually figure out what are the right tags and captions to make sure that this information is controlled appropriately. And we don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah, super exciting. And I love this the notion of AI being having as its goal the reduction of toil.
Yeah.
You announced last year the rolling out of an internal AI chatbot to staff. You're certainly leaning into the use of artificial intelligence. Talk a little bit further about where things stand now. You've begun to do so, but also some of the exciting use cases as you look to the future as to what might be possible in its use.
I actually reflected a little bit. It's almost 1 year since we rolled out what we call StateChat, which is our generative AI chatbot. Um, and it has a whole bunch of capabilities it didn't have a year ago, of course. It works a lot better than it worked a year ago, frankly. But I thought about sort of how did we get here and what did we learn and what was I surprised about? And this is a place where I can say my instincts were mostly wrong. And I feel like I've gotten so smart about this. So when we rolled it out, I was hearing like loud and clear demand from a very vocal minority that said, I'm seeing on the internet, I can use just commercial tools and they can translate 100 pages of Russian text into 5 English bullet points in 12 seconds. And if I do this myself, now I will say these State Department people are magical with their languages. And still, if Russian is not your first language, it's going to be an uphill. So they said, I need this. And so I worked with our chief data and AI officer and we said, okay, we're going to build a chatbot that you can upload a document and then, sort of all the magic of generative AI. It'll translate it, it'll summarize it, it'll, all of that. And then I said, my goal is to field it to everyone. Like I was really clear. I was like, I don't want to limit this to senior leaders. I don't want to limit this. I don't want to limit it in any way. I want to field it to 100,000 people. So we did that. And then because I'm naive, I thought it will take fire. You know what I mean? Like we'll just have to like announce it and then like people will rush to it. And that is true. 3,000 people, three to like 6 went screaming for it, right? And they are our best users. If we make like a minor change to the prompt, they will tell us before our analytics tell us. Like they are the people who are like, it's cool that you added this capability, but really I need this. Like they are amazing. They are amazing. And they are driving what we build in this domain. And I thought, oh, these 3,000 to 6,000 people, they're going to tell their friends and everyone's going to see it's magical. And we're going to have more users and we know what to do with. And the chief data and AI officer was like, I think we're going to need to do some training. I think we should make some videos. I think we should put some training online. I think we're going to maybe have some events with leadership where they tell them they can use it. Like, we're going to have to educate people. And I said, like, we're going to spend 90% of our time building this awesome thing and 10% of the time talking about it, because then it will organically grow. Completely wrong. We had a dedicated 6,000 users. You know what I mean? They stuck with us. They love it. They use it all the time. To get to 40, 50,000, which I thought would organically happen in 3 weeks. No, it did not. We're there today, but we're there today with like very intentional and consistent training and education at every level. And then now we're going and saying, okay, in our 270 posts across the world, where are people not using it? And why not? Like, does it not work well there? Are the languages not in there? What's the problem? So we're being very intentional in engagement. The other thing is, so like, I love the nerdiest part of this. Like, we have multiple agents and I want the agents to call each other, and then I want to add more agents and have those agents, you know what I mean? We have this whole like mini graphs upon graphs and like a whole backend that we care deeply about. And the capability that users say they want, because we have this really close relationship with like our biggest users, they told us like, listen, you have helped me write better talking points or memos or, department-wide notices. But the problem is I got to copy paste out of StateChat. I built something with StateChat that we're iterating on together. I got to copy paste out of there, and then I got to put it in Word, and then I got to format it like a memo. Formatting and like templates, this is not, you know what I mean? This is, I don't know, technology from the 90s. Like, this is a new technology that like we can provide you a template. But our users said, like, what would really, really, you've already saved me all this time. You've made me smarter. You've made me know more as I draft this. Now reduce that toil. I don't want to have to find that template and then futz around indenting things. You know what I mean? So we made it so that you can say, you can build something with StateChat, build this, whatever it is, talking points or a memo. And then you can go in, we call it DocuChat. And then you can go in and select, what am I building this for? What is this? Is it a memo? Is it, I'm writing talking points for the secretary? Like, what is this? And you select the right thing, and then it populates it. And like, that is not super high tech, you know what I mean? But it is what is saving our people time.
Yeah, very interesting. And this reminds me of something you mentioned to me, of how you have a philosophy of letting people experiment.
Yeah.
And I'd love to have you talk a little bit about that philosophy and how you've already started to talk about even some of your learnings, the necessity in some cases of training before experimentation. But talk a bit about your own philosophy of how ideas blossom as a result of broader experimentation and the methods that you found that have worked best.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think we're in a really like powerful and exciting posture because we have, to some degree, like little islands of activity, right? We have really big embassies and consulates, and we have technology pros there who are solving problems. And then we also had all these different functional domains, and they were solving problems. So I actually think AI is a really good example. We had the folks in public diplomacy, and they said, every day, and even like in recent memory, for people who still work at state, they remember this. You're at your embassy overseas. A big part of your job is, what in the world is happening here? You know what I mean? So you read the local paper and you start at 4 a.m. and maybe the paper's in English, maybe it's not, probably not. And then you read articles. And then in the day, they used to cut them out with scissors. So cut them out from the newspaper and then translate them and write notes and then give it to the ambassador so that every day he or she could see what's in the press, what's going on. And this is not a modern way to do it, but it was the way we did it. And so the folks in public diplomacy, which is sort of are the folks who had this job, they created something that they call Northstar, and they launched it also, I think, a little bit over a year ago. And what it does is it tracks news from all over the world in all different languages, and they've made it very easy to write queries. So you can write a query about a very specific topic or a very broad topic, and then you can say, I only want Chinese language publications. So you can also, as a public diplomacy officer, say, oh, this is what China is reporting in Chinese. This is what China is reporting in English. Like, how related are these? And the other thing you can do is you can watch a story progress. So not being someone who's like super knowledgeable about how like stories work in the press, this was news to me that like you can see, day one, there's 10 articles about it, and day two, there's 35, and day three, there's 78, and so you can watch the arc of a story, and it will show that. It is incredible. And then it also, obviously, of course, translates automatically. You can get it to summarize. We've created, it's not perfect. I want these two agents to call each other and act as agents. They don't. But we can, if you're determined, we can make it work with StateChat so you get the benefits of both. But I think sometimes CIOs would have said, like, that is shadow IT. I guess. Like, I didn't fund the thing, but they are meeting cybersecurity requirements, right? You're not on my network if you're not doing that. They're meeting cybersecurity requirements, and they built something bloody magical. You know what I mean? So my position is just like applaud. It's awesome. And so I think now we're at the beginning of AI to some degree. And I believe in 1,000 flowers blooming. Like, my commitment is you got to meet some cybersecurity standards. You can't mess around with that. And then also we'll give you platforms on which you can play. So I do want to provide people, like people will sometimes say, oh, there's the same application, but a different version of the same application has been created in two places. I'm okay with that. Was it created in a secure environment? Yeah. Did somebody was it many millions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of hours of work? That's a different story. But if it's something that took someone a week and a half, they wrote some code, it was fun, they learned something, it works perfectly for their embassy. I'm just not gonna, really try to tamp down experimentation, especially in brand new places. And that's what we do with SATCOM too, actually, is some places, I maybe wouldn't have prioritized parts of Western Europe above parts of Africa, but parts of Western Europe said, we can afford it. We want to see what the SATCOM works like. We're going to buy one. And I said, like, okay, like, I'm going to keep track of everything you do. So I think as things are new, like the big higher headquarters has to say what is happening, who is doing what, is there a cybersecurity concern introduced? And then at some point, higher headquarters has to come in and say, we're going to get this more intentional. And so we've seen that arc with SATCOM where, of the more than 300 terminals we have, are 50 of them, would have they been on my top 300 list? Maybe not, but we learned something. You know what I mean? We learned something, and we didn't spend any energy fighting down people who are excited about technology, learning about technology. And the other thing about foreign services, if you're the DT chief in Paris today, you might be the DT chief in Bujumbura tomorrow. So whatever you learn in Paris, you can bring with you.
Super interesting. I appreciate you offering those reflections. I want to return to something we've scratched the surface on, and that is the fact that you have this remarkable dual experiences as now the CIO of the State Department and prior as the deputy CIO at the Department of Defense. You talked a little bit about some of the nuances and differences from a cybersecurity perspective. I wonder any other particular highlights in terms of some of the ways in which the two roles are similar or different that you would call out?
Yeah, so I think the organizations are culturally really different. And I will say, I have been so blessed. I was so blessed to be at DoD. I loved my time at DoD. DoD suits me in so many ways. And also, this is the coolest job in the world. I have the coolest job in the world. So at DoD, I would say they are a very highly technical. Most of the people in that building are engineers, are mathematicians. I remember once a 3-star general walked into my office holding a router he had bought because he wanted to play with a router. There are pros and cons to this being your customer. You know what I mean? Pros and cons there. The other thing is that they're very operational. So we are operating a global network. We're operating, a lot of things here at the CIO shop. And in DoD, everybody was operating a lot of things. So if the network went down for 5 minutes, everyone was like, the network's down, and then you would fix it. And then they would move on to what is wrong with that submarine? Everyone is operational. And so that gives people, they know that ops are hard and complicated, and that is confirmed to them all of the time. The other thing is that they're a very deferential organization, and that can be hard. So something that a lot of mentors said to me is like, never, never say like, I wish I had a new chair. Someone will bring a new chair. You know what I mean? Like their rank, they're very hierarchy oriented. So they will bring you a new chair. If you direct them to do something, and I learned this a couple of times the hard way, and I would get a butt ma'am. And I said people got like 1 or 2 butt ma'ams a month. So if someone is using a butt ma'am on you, they have a limited number of butt ma'ams. They're probably pretty sure they're right. They may not be right, but you should like really listen because they don't want to disagree with leadership because it's a hierarchy. So state is less of that culture. State is a very consensus-based culture. And so I remember I met with my team and people presented different views. And I said, okay, we're going to do this path. We're going to do this path. Here we go. And then 2 weeks later, I brought everybody back and I said, how are we doing? And they said, well, we wanted to discuss the different paths we could take. And I thought, what is happening? And they are a consensus-based culture. And that makes sense for the mission. Like the IT people are reflecting the broader mission. You know what I mean? And so that was a challenge for me that like being very directive is not the path, That's not what we're going to do here to be successful. The other thing is that they are people that have the opposite skills that I have. So I think that they're magicians. You know what I mean? They're speaking 3 languages. They know what happened. You know, this compares to this thing that happened in 1842 in Austria, because you see, it's amazing. But that also means I remember once I went to talk to someone about their system. They had an old IT system, and I was like, okay, we're going to figure out who pays for this, who fixes it. Is it going to be cloud, software as a service? Like I was like deeply technically in the weeds. And I showed up and I said, okay, tell me a little bit about the system. And they said, okay, in 1960, we were directed by statute. And I thought, oh no, like this cannot be how we're talking about an IT system. And that system was from the 2000s, but they just wanted me to understand the context. And so what this has taught me is a whole new way to communicate, right? At DoD, you could be a lot of sort of like, go do this now. And at state, that we over what feels to me to be over communication, but is not like we communicate a lot and we communicate to non-technical people. And we offer, frankly, a lot of white glove service. And so like that is part of why we have a diplomatic technology chief in every embassy everywhere, is so that if the ambassador has a problem, they have someone who is standing next to the ambassador, who knows the ambassador, who is there to solve that problem. So one of the best things I did was I hired a wonderful strategic communicator here at State, who said to me, your instincts are wrong. You never want to communicate enough. And so she sort of beat me into shape. And help me see the right level of communication. We have to communicate with the people who are going to provide support. Hey, listen, you're going to be asked for the support. This is why we're doing it. Thank you for everything you're doing. You have to communicate with the people who are going to get the new capability. This is really great. Just ask for support. It's been a lot of learning for me, but it's truly a culture. And then what I enjoy most is that DoD and State, we work together on some things. Because we're all part of the national security mission, right? And so it's fun for me to see my old friends and then also to watch this happen. Like I've learned a lot, but I think for the first 6 months, people enjoyed me watching me go through that learning. But now I get to watch others do it, and it's I enjoy it.
Well, kudos to you for assessing the differences in culture and operating so effectively in 2 very different cultures, ultimately changing yourself, no doubt, in terms of the ways in which you operate to make sure that you can be effective. Well, we've talked through this conversation about a number of rising trends, perhaps AI being the biggest one. I wonder, are there other trends that excite you as you look to the future that are making their way as you and the team do the various experiments we talked about that are exciting you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say I'm actually really interested in sort of the ebbs and flow of cloud. Which early in my career, it was like, we are putting everything in the cloud. It is non-negotiable, done, And then, initially too, it was like one cloud. And now we're definitely multi-cloud. And also we're saying, where does it make sense to have things in the cloud? And where does it make sense to have things maybe in a data center that we own? And where does it make sense to maybe have some things locally? And I'm seeing that across industry, right? That there was a knee jerk to everything in the cloud. And then that became expensive. There were challenges with it. So now what we're doing at State is we're saying, we've grown up organically. We have a lot of stuff in the cloud, but honestly, it's been sort of organic decision making, right? Like if somebody had the capacity and the expertise and the interest, they would put it in the cloud. And if they didn't, they wouldn't. And so now you're left saying, like, have we been intentional about this? Like, how often is this data being accessed? Who is accessing it? Who is using it? And that's a place where I think we're going to be making big decisions about, like, is it a petabyte of data and we're moving into the cloud? I recently said, let's move that to the cloud. How hard can it be? And then someone said to me, it's a petabyte of data. And I said, like, oh no, oh no, oh no. But, we're trying to be a little intentional there. And then the other thing, which is, I would say it's a little bit state specific, but I think actually is going to matter for more and more industries, is how do you communicate with trusted partners? So at the State Department, when you go into an embassy, I had never been in an embassy before I started, which is shocking. But I went to an embassy and I imagined it would be, 95% State Department personnel, these foreign service, direct hire, American citizens wearing ties. No. We have Marine security guards. They are Marines. They're in Marine uniforms. It's a hodgepodge when you go in there. You're like, what is the Department of Justice doing here? What is that guy in a military uniform who's not a Marine doing here? Like, it was so many different people. It used to be USAID. You're like, who are you? There were so many different federal agencies, but that embassy needs to produce documents. They need to collaborate. They need to, like, communicate together. And the way that we solve that historically is you showed up in your Air Force uniform and I just gave you a State Department laptop and a State Department email and then off we went. That doesn't make any sense. You know what I mean? Like, that is not a modern way to do business. It's inconvenient for people because this Air Force person is now using their Air Force computer for Air Force things and then using their state computer for things and then maybe emailing things so that this is not a modern way to do business. So we're working to get business to business capability, and we've done it for most of DoD. We've done it for parts of DHS, and what that means is I can, if I'm in a Teams channel with my friends from DoD, I can collaborate with them. Like, that's a huge deal. And I actually think, like, the more we can spread this out across the federal government, the better. And then, do we want to do this with certain trusted vendors in some way? You know what I mean? Like, I think this is a place where the technology isn't limiting necessarily, but it is hard. And also, like, how do we get identity right? So I think those are the two things that I'm, like, really excited about, is how do we get cloud right, both from a financial and operational perspective, and then how do we get business to business collaboration and identity? Identity is the thing that gets you. How do we get that right?
Yeah, great topics both. I wanted to also ask you, as someone I know who has a broad diet in terms of intellectually speaking, I wondered if there's anything you've recently read, watched, and or listened to that you'd recommend to others. What comes to mind?
Freedom's Forge. I read that book, and, like, the specifics I think yes, a lot of history, and that was good, but it can be done. Like, all that book, like, when I read that book, every chapter I thought, oh, it can be done. Like that you can do things that seem impossible. You know what I mean? It was, and, like, the strength of America. The book was very inspiring to me. And then the other book that I read that I love is The Hard Thing About Hard Things, Ben Horowitz. Also, I'm reading his new book now, but I'm, like, on chapter 3, so I haven't made very much progress yet. But The Hard Thing About Hard Things, he said, as soon as you have 10 employees, someone is doing something out of alignment with your vision. And I had always thought, oh, I'm doing a bad job communicating. Like, that's why, but there are thousands of people. So, like, maybe I'm doing a bad job communicating. And then I thought more about it, and I thought, you know what, actually, sometimes I'm doing things outside of my vision, and it doesn't mean I'm a bad communicator. It just means it's hard. So I felt really seen by that book. I loved it.
Well, that's a great recommendations, both. Thank you so much, Kelly. And thank you, more generally speaking, for a really terrific conversation, sharing a bit of your wisdom and the remarkable work that you and your colleagues do at the State Department. It's really inspiring to hear more about that, and I appreciate the conversation.
Well, I really appreciate being here. And also, man, I inherited the best people, so I got really lucky.